Okay, recording in progress, and it says that we should be live. Let's see, are we live? It says we're live.
I think we're live.
You think we're live? Can you see stuff? Okay.
I can see.
Brilliant. In that case, I'm trying to work out, I always have this problem when I go live on Facebook, when you're in the sort of the dashboard bit, you then can't see the questions pop up very easily, but I'm going to leave it for a bit, and later on, if people post questions, we'll find a way of getting them. I don't want to just be standing looking at it all the time, but I end up sort of trying to work out how to do the technology. But anyway, it says we're live. Hopefully people can see us. So hello, everybody. And if there's nobody out there, hello, empty world. But I'm thinking somebody will be there. And it is my great pleasure to welcome into this Zoom conference. Cheers.
Cheers.
Mr. Justin Hill, a prize-winning author and creator of Worlds with Words, as I believe he is known. And I'm just going to give you a quick introduction, Justin. So I just opened your website, and
see my handsome face.
What does it say? Yeah, what does it say about you? Well, first I see that you've written quite a lot of novels. You can tell me about how many you've written in a minute. But you've won lots of different things. You've won lots of awards. You've been a Sunday Times and Washington Post and the Times Book of the Year. Or you, not you, your books, I'm presuming. You've won Somerset Maugham, Betty Trask and Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prizes. So you've been all over the place. You've lived in China, you've lived in Hong Kong, you've lived in other places which you can tell us about, and you've written about Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, and you've also written stuff about set in China, modern day and ancient China or old China, and you've also written lots of fantasy and sci-fi for the Black Library, which is the Games Workshop guys, doing both. I think both the fantasy stuff and the Warhammer 40,000.
It's true, yeah.
Warhammer, and yeah, so awesome. You're basically very productive. And I would just tell people about how we very first met. Our very first contact was way back. I don't know when it was. Probably 2014.
I think so.
Something like that. And I think you were still in Hong Kong. I know that.
I was,
sure.
Yeah.
And I had written my first novel, which was The Serpent's Sword, which I was then trying to, I think I'd already tried, well, I had an agent and I was trying to sell it through the agent. And at the time, I hadn't managed to sell it, and I was going to self-publish. And I wanted to get some quotes from writers in the same genre that I thought would be good. And I'd read Shield Wall, and I'd loved Shield Wall, your book, Shield Wall, and which is set in the 11th century, the build up to Battle of Hastings. Obviously, you know that, but hope maybe some of the people watching don't. And I'd loved it, and I'd read that halfway through writing the book, and I thought your use of language was brilliant, and it was a great book and everything. So I contacted you and said, "Can I send you a manuscript and you give me a quote?" And you said yes, very kindly. And so I sent it off to you, and weeks later you received it in Hong Kong, and you were kind enough to give me a lovely quote along with other writers as well. So it was great. And later on,
which is good, because I'm actually really bad at, I say yes, and then I'm so disorganized that people's deadlines pass before I've got a chance to have a look at it.
That's probably because I was a nag. I probably nagged you or something. I don't know. I can't remember. I'm quite good at nagging people, as my wife would tell me. But then years later, fast forward a couple of years, and you've moved back to the UK. And
we were on a panel together, weren't we?
We were on a panel. So the first time that I spoke publicly about writing was just after I published, I think I'd only published the first, or maybe I published the first two books by that point. I self-published The Serpent's Sword and The Cross and the Curse. I'd self-published. And I just was in the process of transitioning over to Head of Zeus. So they then decided to be interested once I sold a few books. But yeah, I was on a panel in Oxford in the Historical Novel Society in 2016, I think it was. And and it was my first experience was sitting on a panel with you as the compere or the chairman or whatever of the panel, And I remember thinking, what a lovely guy, such a nice guy. It was great, we had a nice little chat beforehand. And then I sat down and it was you, Douglas, I'm trying to remember everyone now, Simon Scarrow, Douglas Jackson.
It was about fighting or writing fighting, wasn't it?
Yeah, Harry Sidebottom.
Yeah.
And anyone else? Was that it?
S.J. Turney was the Scottish guy.
Douglas Jackson, wasn't it?
Douglas Jackson. Okay, yeah.
And so all these luminaries of historical fiction, and I absolutely bricking it. We had like 40, 50 people sitting there, and so you turn to me and you go, "So I'll start with Matthew. Can you introduce yourself?" Like, thanks a lot. So that was my first experience. So thanks.
No, we did so well. I mean, you held your own. I don't think, did I realize it was your first go? I'm not sure I did. But that was a great panel, actually, because they were such interesting writers and so dynamic, weren't they? I mean, they were just such great characters. The difficulty was shutting them up and, giving everyone a chance to speak.
Absolutely. That is often the difficulty. And in this case, with just the two of us, the difficulty will be shutting me up and letting you talk. So I will make sure that I do give you some space to talk. So I've done the introduction and I think just in terms of what we're going to do, we're just going to have a chat, right, and ask questions to each other. And if anyone's got questions on the live thing, please post them, and I will try and work out how to see questions. If I can't see them, maybe Justin can.
Yeah, I'm just looking.
But if anyone sort of said hello or anything, I don't know why I can't see it. But anyway. Oh yeah, I can see it now. I've worked out how to see it. They move it around all the time. So yes, I can see. So lots of people saying hello. So we've got Heather.
So where's that?
I don't know on where you can see it, but I can see it on my dashboard here. So I can tell you we've got Heather saying hello, Christopher Godfrey.
Hello, Heather.
Sam Nash.
Hi, Chris.
Matt Dean. Svetlana. Tony Hill. Elle Hill. Oh, there's someone that you might know there. Your wife, I believe. Yeah. Oh no, it's Izzy. It's Izzy.
It is Izzy. Yeah.
It's Izzy.
They're having having bedtime stories. Thursday's my night off. With us. So.
Well, hello to everybody. So it's great. I can finally work out. I don't do enough of these live things to see where people are, but now I've worked it out. So now I'll be able to see. So brilliant. So if you've got any questions, anyone, post them. And now I know I can actually see them. I will respond to those questions and ask them to Justin, or take the question myself, or maybe both take the questions. And I chatted with Justin earlier, and we said what we would do is we would just ask each other a series of questions, but we didn't prime each other about what those questions are going to be. So I will start. So yeah, make it more.
There's fun in spontaneity, because often you rehearse conversation beforehand, and actually you say more interesting things before you ever get on screen. So we thought we'd surprise each other and prompt each other, which would make it more interesting for you guys. Yeah.
So hopefully that works out. So my first question is, I gave you the big build up. I introduced you, said all these books and everything. So my first question is that your trajectory as a writer was that you had, as far as I'm aware, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, you had great success with your first novel. So your first novel was a real big success, award winner. You made money out of it, and it was all good. And then inevitably, not every single book that you release can attain the same heights as that. And in my case, I've not had any awards. So I don't know what it's like. So basically, what's it been like for you to have early success, and how's that affected your writing career?
Yeah, I was thinking, because we've almost had opposite careers, because you were talking about how many books I've written. And to be honest, I've been in the industry a really long time. I mean, I wrote my first book in 1993. Wow. That was published in 1995. So that was kind of legacy publishing, where you kind of wrote to publishers and sent in sample, paper samples, pre-computers. So you sent in, paper samples, and they would ask for, more chapters. So I did have a kind of huge success in my first novel, but I'd written 2 books before that first novel. And the first book was a travel book about China. I did VSO straight from university, and I was living in kind of rural China in the middle of nowhere.
What's VSO? Sorry, just
Yeah, voluntary service overseas.
Okay.
For those of you, it kind of originally started off as a kind of alternative to national service. So you either do national service or service overseas, and it was kind of a 2-year contract. And the idea and the ethos is that a lot of development work, people get paid expat salaries for living in poor countries and doing a job. And VSO's ethos is that you get paid a local wage for doing a local job, and then you have 2 years 2 years contract, and you train someone to do your job before you leave. So you're effectively you're cheap and effective, and then you're training someone to do the job for themselves. So I was living in rural China where they couldn't get English teachers. I was with a Spanish guy because it was so remote and kind of culturally isolated. They sent you in pairs because they found people kind of went a bit mad otherwise. So I was there was 2 Westerners in about 10 million Chinese. The nearest foreigner was 12 hours bus journey away. And I had, peroxide blonde hair, and the little Spanish guy was short, dark, and with black hair. So I stood out like a sore thumb. So my first book was about China. And this was when Japan was still everyone who had any sense was learning Japanese. And the strange kids were learning Chinese. I remember someone writing me a letter saying, "Oh, China's becoming quite fashionable as a film, Raise the Red Lantern." So, it's kind of becoming trendy. So that book got published and it kind of disappeared. And I wrote another book then because I went from China to Eritrea in East Africa. Wow. And I wrote a much better book that then I couldn't get published because it was about a country no one was very interested in. Yeah. So then I switched to fiction, and then I was kind of successful. And in terms of, I think actually, it was obviously great. I remember because I'd spent my 20s pretty much living on about £80 a month, so I earned a few £1,000s in my 20s. And I remember phoning a friend because my first novel went to auction. It was when they were throwing huge amounts of money at first-time authors, and I think it went for a record-breaking amount. It was £150,000 for a unfinished novel. It was, I was in the newspapers. I had people phoning me up for interviews, and I remember phoning up a friend saying, "I'm never going to be poor again." Little did I know. And I think actually, success is really difficult. I found, well, maybe for some people it's easy. I find failure. Anyone who writes or does anything creative, you'll have this experience. I'm sure Matthew, you have as well. Of you have to get over failure. You have to get used to rejection because whatever you're doing is not good enough at that time. And that is quite easy to deal with because you just work harder and you kind of you either give up or you make it better. And I think actually success was much more difficult because in a way it was my first novel. I'd never written a novel before. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I had international deals. I had kind of film companies looking at it. It was really, I think it really kind of threw me, and it's taken me quite a long time to get over success, which sounds bizarre. I think success is.
I get it totally.
Yeah.
So how do you think that affected the way you approached your future, the novels that came afterwards? Well, first question actually before then, how long did you go between getting that deal and actually picking up the pen and writing the next one and actually finishing the next book? Because I can imagine you could be tempted to just go, I'll take the next 5 years off now. I've got this money and it's going to be great and all these deals are coming in, and I don't know.
It was my first novel has been a curse actually in many ways. It was my first novel. I'd never written fiction before, and I found I was a much better fiction writer than I was a travel writer. Because a travel writer, you have to create a Justin Hill character who's a bit like a puppet and is sort of slightly stiff and awkward, and everything's kind of seen through you. So fiction I found so liberating, so exciting, and it was like falling in love for the first time. It was just so exciting. I'd spent my 20s living in rural China and Africa, and then China again. I came back. I was doing a master's course at Lancaster University, so we were just there's 14 of us just sitting around, for 6 hours a week talking, commas and adjectives and just soaking up literature. And I wrote this novel in 6 months, from kind of literally starting to finishing it and packing it off and it being published. So that has been a curse, really, because novels don't come that easily. and it kind of came out fully formed. So yeah, it's been something it's taken me a lot. I say it's taken me a long time to get over. I'm starting to feel now I'm over it. And about 10 years ago, I started writing for Black Library, because I felt I'd never done my apprenticeship. And I really wanted to just do that kind of apprenticeship of pitch a story, plan a story, write a story, deliver, do it again, do the same thing again with another novel, deliver. And in a way, that's what kind of Black Library has given me. It's given me kind of a crash course in how to sustain the writing. But to get back to your question, I didn't wait that long, actually. And funnily enough, I started writing my second novel, I think it was about 6 months after Drink a Dream Tea House came out.
Okay.
And I started it the week of September the 11th. So I was like 3 days into it.
Good decision.
And and was it a Thursday morning? A Thursday morning, I started to start writing, and then kind of the Twin Towers happened, and it was such a kind of hugely emotional, impactful moment that I stopped writing. So I just stopped. I was like, I can't write a novel, and it took me about 6 months to pick that up again, and then that took me about 2 years, and each novel actually has taken me longer, actually, the longer I've gone on.
So do you differentiate? So talking to you now, I know that you write under the name Justin D. Hill for Black Library. So it sounds to me like you differentiate between novels, which are the Justin Hill novels, which take you 2 years or whatever to write, and then the Justin D. Hill novels that are the Black Library ones. Do you think of them as two very different things, in that a Justin Hill novel is longer and richer and takes you more effort to write?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of the odd things of my career is it's so disparate. I mean, it kind of encompasses, China, modern China, historical China, Africa, Warhammer, Warhammer 40K, historical fiction. And so it's really hard trying to kind of condense what I do. But there's certainly a big difference between my stuff for Black Library and my stuff for Justin Hill. And I think I guess I was tempted to do a kind of pseudonym. I had a friend at school called John Hunter, so I always wanted to be called Justin Hunter. And so I was quite tempted, but Justin T. Hunter, Justin the Hunter, I thought would be a great pseudonym. So I was tempted to that, but I think Ian Banks and Ian M. Banks, he did the kind of an initial just to differentiate those two.
I have to tell you that I know you know, but some people might not know that I have written a short story for Black Library, which hasn't been published yet. And the name I have chosen is Matthew J. Harffy. So I followed your thing of just because my second name's Joseph, so I just thought I'd just stick in just stick in the initial. Because I think you don't want to lose your brand completely. I think that you work so hard to get your name known that I know there's an argument to be said about having a completely different name, but I know experience of, for example, I know Angus Donald, who's really obviously very successful with his historical fiction. He released a fantasy novel, which I can't remember the name of, The Gates of Stone, I think it is, or something like that. And he was forced, because of contractual reasons, or what his editor wanted or his agent wanted or whatever, he had to release it under a completely different name. So he changed the name, and of course nobody knew about it. It did nothing. Not because it was a bad novel, I'm sure. I haven't read it, but I'm sure it was good. And I know that he bemoans the fact, but it's very difficult. You spend all this effort getting your name out there, to then sort of change your name completely seems crazy in this modern age. Was so difficult to get yourself noticed, get your head above water, really.
I think so, and especially now, it's kind of so much is about, well, not necessarily brand, but in terms, kind of, you build your reputation.
Well, you're the brand,
with the readers.
Your name is kind of the brand. I think the name of a writer, really.
I think that the difference with the Games Workshop is that you're delivering to a deadline.
That's what my life.
Yeah, and so with Games Workshop, a kind of a book maybe go through 2, perhaps 3 drafts, whereas a Justin Hill novel goes through kind of 7 or 8.
Okay. So you're right. Our trajectories have been very different. In fact, I'm not writing novels for Black Library, but I do have my own. I mean, I signed contracts for 3 book deals or whatever with Head of Zeus. When the first one was like a 4-book deal, I think, and the first one was 6-month deliveries. So no time to mess about there. It was a novel every 6 months.
Okay, so that was, it wasn't just you being an incredibly prolific writer. It was,
well, I was just having to do it because I'd set myself these crazy deadlines because I'd signed a contract. I mean, I'm sure if I'd said to them, look, you know what, it's going to take me a couple of extra months, but I worked as a technical writer beforehand in an IT company. And so we worked to deadlines. And so we knew that there was a release of software coming out. You can't say to the software company, well, actually, I'll write the manual 2 weeks later, or well, you can try. It doesn't fly. You've got to get it out there. So so there was lots of late nights for the technical writing, to get stuff done right up to the wire, So I was kind of used to the deadline thing. But yeah, with the most recent contract I signed, I actually said, look, I can't sustain a book every 6 months. It's just too much. I've run out. I'm running out of steam. So I'm now. This last one I signed 3 books in 2 years, so 8 months per book. So it's a little bit less, which seems more doable. That seems about doable.
But it's been very successful for you. I mean, you've been incredibly successful. I mean, you've written kind of as many as me in 6 years, 7 years now.
I'm working on my 12th novel now. And the first one was published in 2015, I think, something like that. So yes, about six years. And the first one took me ages. The first took me years to write because it was the first one. But So
your second novel then, that must have been a hell of a change, because if you took a couple of years to write the first one, and then the second one.
I started the first one in 2001. I finished it in 2014 or 2015.
Okay, so that is the slowest novel.
But I eventually just wrote. I wrote probably 2/3 of it in about 6 months. I sort of said, right, that's it. I've got to write. Boom, I just did it. Set myself some deadlines and went for it. But I do impose deadlines on myself. I think if I didn't have a contract, so when I was self-published or I was unpublished, I still set myself the deadlines. I said, you've got to do. At that time, I was working full time, so I said you've got to do 3,000 words a week, and that's what I did. And then when I went down part time, then I said, right, I'm going to do 5,000 words a week, whatever. And now I'm full time. I say, right, 2,000 words a day, so 10,000 words a week, more or less. Which it tends to be about 8,000 words a week now, I find.
And is that kind of finished, or so do you kind of do one? You kind of polish as you go along, or you kind of bang it out and then come back?
Yeah, my process is to. I wish I could just sort of bang it out and really not worry about it, but I think the language is too important to me. The sort of the sound of the words I read in my head. I read out loud in my head. So if you know what I mean, I hear the words when I'm reading something, which I know some people don't. Well, I know some people don't. I know, and I read with accents and everything. I'm kind of acting any novel I read. So I'm a very slow reader. So what I do is I write one day, and then the next day I will read what I wrote the day before, and I will edit that. So it maybe takes me an hour or two. So by about sort of 11 o'clock in the morning, I've probably polished what I did the day before, and then I'll start writing and trying to get my 2,000 words done before I've got to pick up the kids.
Did you read that on screen or you read it on paper?
I read that on screen, and then at the very end, when I then finish the whole novel, I never go back after that. So that's that first day. I don't go back. I then go forward. It's always going forward, and always chronologically. I never skip. So this is one thing I was going to ask you about. Do you skip bits? Do you think this bit's difficult? I'm going to write the end because I've got this idea for a big finale. Do you do that?
I haven't. I've started doing it actually with this novel, because I'm really kind of rushing because I want to deliver on time, and so I'm kind of putting in like little notes, like a little scene here, something will happen here with this character, and I'm just kind of throwing those in just to kind of keep my momentum up and to keep going. Yeah,
because I don't ever skip scenes, but what I do find is that because I know where these big placeholder moments are, the big finales or the fights or whatever. I find it actually adds speed to my writing, because I want to get to those bits, because I find the bits in between a bit more boring, and so I'll push to write more quickly maybe the bits I perceive as being a bit slower, which I think then lends them a bit of pace to get to the action scenes or whatever I'm excited about. But yeah, at the end, anyway, when I get to the final end of the whole thing, I go through and first I on screen, I'll pick up all of I put square brackets around anything that I'm not sure about, which can be names of characters that just walk onto the page that I'm not sure about, or trees. I mean, I spend like 2 or 3 days then researching trees, because I'll put a tree, everywhere, and I have to go back and find out what trees grew in the 7th century in Norfolk, or whatever it is, So I do all that, and then at that point, and I know you do this as well, I then print out the whole novel once I've cleaned up all the square brackets. So at that point, I've got clean copy ish. And I think at that stage, some authors then at that stage would then say, well, I've done enough, I'll send it off to my agent or my publisher or whatever. At that point, I don't. I print it out, and I'll then probably spend about a month reading the whole thing. It depends how long it is. The last one took me about a month because it was 160,000 words. So I was like pulling my hair out by the end of it. And then I just read the whole thing. I edit on paper, and then I put those edits back into the soft copy, and then I send it off to my editor at that stage. Well, in fact, at that stage, I used to then send it to my beta readers before sending it to my editor, but now I send to beta readers at the same time I send to my editor, because the timeline.
And how did you get
compressed.
beta readers?
They're just friends. They're just good friends that have read the books, and they've read all the books, and they seem to be honest, because they tell me when they find things they don't like or they don't understand.
Yeah. And do you have? Did it take you a while to find those, or because having friends who are necessarily interested or want to read a book and give you feedback, and that's quite a kind of it's quite a big ask.
Yeah, I think I'm really lucky, actually, because I mean it's only a handful of people, and some of them are too slow. Actually, I've got a couple of friends that are quite fast at reading, and there's a bit of actually my 2 rugby buddies that we were talking about before we came on air, the guys that I go to rugby with. So they both read my books. So Gareth and Simon, and I think this latest book they were reading, and Simon sent a WhatsApp message to the rest of us saying, I'm almost finished the book, and suddenly Gareth was like, I've got to read this now. I can't be I've always got to be the first one to finish. So I think he sort of sat up really late at night and finished it so that he could be the first one there. So I'm lucky that they're both quick at reading, because I've got some other guys. There's another guy called Shane, he reads, and a friend of mine in Spain, Alex, they read them as well and give me feedback, but they're often too slow that by the time the feedback comes, sometimes I can capture things in like a copy edit stage or whatever when it's already going through the publishers, but sometimes they're a bit too slow, and so I sort of can't pick up all the changes that they give me.
And do they give you good feedback?
Yeah, most of the feedback I get from people tends to be just, or this is a bit confusing, or I'm not sure about this, or there's a typo here, or I didn't understand that you've used the wrong name for a character or something. So it's sort of like a copy edit sort of level, but it's good. It's sort of definitely an extra few pairs of eyes there, and they definitely find useful stuff. So do you have beta readers? Do you have people that read your stuff?
Not really. My wife, Elle, she used to read it, or everything. But I'm kind of producing too much now, and she would kind of her ears would steam. I did give her I wrote a horror novel for Black Library, which is coming out. It was my COVID year, so last year it was kind of the novella I was supposed to bang out, which then just ended up taking up the entire year of kind of trying to write between lockdown and kids' homework and things. So kind of writing horror during COVID was a bit of a nightmare. And I gave it to Elle to read, and I think she got like 4 pages in, was like, this is kind of too sick. So
yeah, that's interesting, because my wife's a librarian and she reads everything. I mean, she reads loads, and she's read I think 3 or 4 of my books, but she's kind of gone off them a bit, and she sort of said, I don't like, they're too violent, and lots of violence to women, which she was not happy about. And it's good because she kind of gave me a bit of a steer and said maybe all the women don't have to just go see a therapist, and maybe all the women don't need to get raped and murdered. Maybe something nice could happen to someone. So that was good feedback. Actually, I mean, I have to say that my wife Maite's feedback on the first novel, the first episode, was incredibly useful, because when she did read that, and she gave me feedback and said that it was very two-dimensional, basically. And I sort of thought, my thinking of it was that Bearbrand is a 7th century warrior, and I was thinking very literally, very realistically. I think for me, I'm thinking he's a warrior in the 7th century. He doesn't really have much of an inner monologue about whether it's right to kill people or whether it's bad to kill people. He just does it. He's a warrior, right? Someone comes along, he kills them, the same way that a farmer doesn't really worry too much about killing a pig or killing a a sheep. And I think probably or possibly maybe that's the way warriors did think back in the day. And maybe some, and maybe some do now. You know, I think professional soldiers, some of them that really get into it, maybe they like that as well. Maybe it's not very healthy, but maybe that's the way some people think. But anyway, there was nothing going on inside. You know, it was much more like Bearbrand goes here, something happens, he does some stuff, he talks to someone, kills them, and goes off and does something else. And so she sort of said you need to have some more what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, because they have to be empathetic.
Yeah,
you have to, it has to be interested, don't they? And I want to kind of follow their story.
Yeah, so I think that was an important moment for me, and I think it made a big difference to the writing, actually. And so I think since then, lots of people sort of say, oh, well, they compare the books to Bernard Cornwell's Uhtred books because there's a similarity there, and they start off in Bebenberg and similar time period. But people often say, well, but Bearbrand is a bit more empathetic, you know, or there's something he's different. You know, he's more sensitive in some ways. He still fights and kills people and gets involved in big battles, but it's not just a carbon copy of Uhtred. He's not going around in exactly the same vein.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. It's a lot to demand in a relationship to kind of you know, it can be very problematic. Ellie's great, actually, when I give her something, because she's very ruthless.
That's what wives are for.
I've always, you know, I'm a bit of a masochist. I've always kind of thought the worst thing anyone can say to me once they've read something is, "Oh, that's brilliant," because then that gives me nothing to improve or nothing to make better.
Well, that's the success all over again. That's the difficult success, right? That's what happened with that first novel. That's brilliant. Here, have loads of money. You go, oh great. Now what? Now what do I do? How do I improve? You know. So
I'm still getting over it.
Yeah. You need people to sort of question things.
Yeah, I've been chatting with some other writers recently, and they're kind of complaining about bad reviews. And my take on bad reviews is often I agree with them.
Well, yeah, I mean sometimes I do as well. And I tell my wife, I read all the reviews and I keep saying, oh, somebody said this. And she says, you're going to go crazy reading all these bad reviews, and it's going to mess with your head. I think, well, a bit, yeah, but at the same time,
you can learn something.
Not always. I mean, sometimes I think, yeah, that's a bit of a stretch. And often it says a lot more about the reviewer than it does about the writer, I think. So some sort of hang up, you know, that the reviewer.
Damn it, 1 star.
Well, say that again.
The book came damaged. I give it 1 star.
Yeah, I mean, it's more than that though. You do get those ones, but more than that, you get the ones where it's like, you know, I didn't like the fact there was sex in it or violence or whatever, and that says more about the reviewer, I think, than necessarily about the writing or the book. You know, so it's much more of a, you know, some people say I put this down after, you know, 3 chapters because they said the F word 3 times. You know, something. Okay, right? You know, that's really not the writer's problem. You know. Anyway, so you mentioned lockdown a bit and how difficult that was, and I'm sure that everyone listening and watching had their own stories of difficulty, and probably some much worse than ours potentially. But what was your routine like, and how did it affect you? What's your normal routine like, and how did lockdown affect that normal routine?
Yeah, my normal routine is it's either during school holidays when I get up at 7 and is my perfect start to a morning. Elle's a bit of a late riser, kids are kind of late risers. So I go from dreams to the blank page. And I've always said that's like the perfect way to start, you know, a day's writing. You don't listen to any news, get up, don't talk to anyone, nothing kind of interrupts that. And then you just kind of go from sleep to start telling the stories. So that's great. And then I'll keep going till about 11:30, or when the kids start fighting, you know, which they're much older now, so they don't really do that. But typically during the school term, you know, we kind of get 4 kids out the door, and then I sit down about 8:40 once Ted's the little one has been picked up on his school bus, and start writing. And then I keep going until about 3:40 when he comes back from school. And I'm not sure I would be able to work that much more than that. You know, you run out of steam, especially on the first draft where you're kind of creating. So now I'm working through a second draft, and it's actually much less kind of creative energy.
It's a lot less strenuous, isn't it, when you're doing the edit sort of thing? It's a lot less mentally taxing That
yeah,
first, yeah.
When you're just making it up, it can be quite kind of exhausting. My wife, you know, she laughs at me. She's a real job, and but it, you know, it can be quite exhausting. So that's kind of typically my day. And oddly, on those kind of odd days where I can't get to work, whatever, you know, is kind of happening, is like a, you know, a dental trip or something, then I have a kind of, I tell myself all day I'm going to work tonight. About 9:30, I get a really good hour's work in, or
Really?
hour and a half, and I can really bang it out.
That's interesting. I never, well, now I never write in the evenings. I never write after, basically after school is over. 5 o'clock basically is my cutoff normally. But obviously, like, when I was working full time or even part time, I used to write more in bursts. I used to write.
Did you get up really early in the morning?
I didn't. I thought about it, but I couldn't because I was just so tired from work. I just couldn't be bothered. But in the end, I used to write sometimes at lunchtimes. So at work, I would go into an office, take my laptop and a sandwich, and I'd write 45 minutes, and I would like bang out 600, 700 words in 45 minutes or something, and then I'd go home and write, even on the train. I mean, I've written on the train, I've written on planes, I've written hotel rooms, written in the library, written in sitting in the back of the car while parked waiting for the kids, sat with headphones on, typing at birthday parties in play centres, you know, the soft play areas with the kids playing, and all the other parents think, what a grumpy fucker. Because I've been sat there, and they'd be like coming over, like, fuck off, I don't want to talk to you, I'm writing. But I just decided I was wasting so much time in my life just going to all these different things. I thought, sitting, just waiting for the kids to do something. I thought, I need to write. That's really why I finished Serpent Sword.
That's great. That's so impressive.
But after that, it's been downhill since then. It's more difficult, actually. When you're writing full time, I think it's more difficult because I have these bursts of energy. But like you say, you get tired by the end of the day, but also I find I write for 20 minutes and then I'll stop and think about it a bit, and then I write for 40 minutes and stop and go and have a cup of tea, go to the loo, whatever, then you write for 45 minutes. You very rarely just sit down and write for hours on end.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite impressive that you were managing to write whilst also writing as your kind of job. Because you're squeezing the same, you know, or you're working the same muscle in a way, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think by that point I wasn't really doing much in the day job. I was managing a team more than writing. So it was all. It was. I think the context switching was very helpful to me. So all of my day job was actually being on different conference calls. We had people in India and people in Israel and people in the States and people in Canada, and I was all the time, and even the teams I managed teams in some of those different countries, and so it's just being on calls all the time, and so having to always switch around actually helps me to focus quickly, which I'm kind of forgetting now. I think as I've been writing now full time for 2 or 3 years, I'm sort of losing that ability. But my ability to sort of focus in and spend an hour of intense writing and get like 1,000 words written in an hour, that seems to have sort of deteriorated over time.
So the switch for you from going from writing part-time to full-time, because I think I met you when you just gone full-time. I can't remember why.
Was that the Bernard Cornwell fan club thing?
Oh, I think it was in,
Yes, that could be. So so that's the second time that I met Justin, for everyone else listening. So yeah, we met face to face again in York,
Giles Christian.
With Giles Christian and the SJ Turney, Simon Turney, at that stage. So, and we were on a panel, and
who was the moderator?
I forget the name.
I forgot her name.
Sharon Bennett Connolly. Sharon Bennett Connolly. Yes. Okay. So I've remembered all the names. So that's good now. So yes, all wonderful people, and it was a lovely panel with people from the Bernard Cornwell fan club. And I know actually Chris Bailey posted about it today, didn't he, on the Bernard Cornwell fan club? Great. So we might have got a few guys in from the fan club. So
what a fun bunch.
Yeah, well, great bunch. Yeah, it was really good. I've forgotten where the story's going now. Oh yes, so the question was, why was
you just gone full time?
I went full time. The reason I went full time was I wanted to go full time. So I'd gone down to a 3-day working week. So it was kind of perfect. I was writing 2 days full time, writing for 2 days, and then working for 3 days, and getting reasonable salary working as a manager in an IT company. So I was getting it was pretty good. And then they made redundant everybody in my team and me.
So you've been writing novels all the time.
Writing novels all the time. No, maybe. I hope not. No, No, but they basically one day just literally just I had my usual meetings. It was just like, well, the whole team is going to be made redundant, and we'd like you to make them redundant, please, and then say goodbye. And I said no. I said if you're making me redundant too, you can do the rest. I'm getting made redundant. Bye bye. So I'm not doing that as well. So off we went. And so I've been working there for 18 years or 17, 18 years, something like that. So I ended up with a reasonable payout. So it gave me a little buffer then to be able to say, I'm going to try to write full time. And I spoke to my wife and we said, look, you got a year. If you can make it work after a year, then you can carry on, basically. So I wrote furiously for a year. At the end of the year, it was like, it wasn't great, but I haven't sort of dug into the savings. I was still managing to just about make enough money to sort of get by with the writing. So I said, well, let's carry on, give it another year, and then it's only got better since then. So I've been selling, I've been doing much better in the last couple of years. So.
And what's success? Because you were self-publishing, then you were taken on by a publisher.
Yeah. So.
And how's that compared? Because one of you've got to do everything yourself, and the other one you have.
Yeah. So that's the main. I suppose there's lots of benefits, So I mean, it was a difficult decision because I was making, with the first two books I self-published, I was making reasonable money. And actually, when I first went over to Aria, who it was then, which was a new imprint of Head of Zeus, and they've now changed. The imprint that I'm now with is Aries, which is more specific around action, adventure, historical fiction, that sort of stuff. And so when I first went over, I took a massive pay cut. I was suddenly getting a lot less because they're doing all this stuff, like the cover design and advertising and whatever else they do, editing and all the stuff, distribution and whatever the publishers do. I was getting a smaller percentage of sales, and so suddenly, I took a hit, and I really wondered about it for the first few months whether I'd made the right decision. But I think it's a slow industry. Everything sort of takes a while, and so the more I just thought, well, I'll keep plugging away. And there was a moment, after a few books, I thought maybe I should go back to self-publishing. And then I got my first write-up in the Times just before lockdown for Wolf of Wessex, and sales went through the roof. And I don't know if it was because of that, or because of lockdown, or because the book was better, or it was a standalone book so people could pick it up. And so I don't know what it was, but some sort of magical fairy dust hit that book, and it sold loads more than the previous books in a much shorter space of time. So
wow.
So suddenly I sort of thought, okay, I feel vindicated to stay around here now.
And has you've been working then with an editor and things, and has that helped you think?
So to start with, I was working with one editor who then left, and they moved to a different publisher. And my first editor was quite hands-off. They didn't really do a huge amount I didn't get a lot of feedback, really. It was much more, this is fine. One of those sort of situations where it's almost like, this is fine. And you're left wondering.
This will do.
The comments were very small, and so you're left wondering, thinking, well, I've done the best I can do. I was hoping you could maybe, entice something else out of me. But my new editor, Nick Cheetham, is actually the CEO of Head of Zeus as well, and he's really good, and he seems to really get what I do. He sort of likes the books. He really likes the stuff, but he also is very incisive about. I don't get massive changes, but he's like, he'll come and say, I have an idea. You're like, there'll be reasonably big changes, like, I think this character should be changed, or you should get rid of this character or something. It'd be quite something that you can do in a week or two's effort, but it's like a proper change. It's not just that's fine. It's like, I think you need to work on the ending, or you need to change this chapter, or change the beginning. It's often the beginnings and the endings. The most sort of work. But I feel like that he's definitely helping me write better books, I think.
And how's he changing your kind of beginnings and endings then? What's he doing?
So the very last one I just handed in, which is the sequel of A Time for Swords, which is called A Night of Flames. In that one, the ending, actually, the change was quite small, but it was literally just saying, you've kind of ended, and then it sort of peters out a bit. And he just said, just cut the petering out bit and save that for book 3. So it was a bit of me sort of carrying on, sort of waffling about stuff. And he just said, look, you can end here, cut it off there, and that's much more of an abrupt, badam, the end. you saved a bit, and you go, and then more things happened, and lots of excitement, and blah blah blah, and it sort of waffled on for a couple of paragraphs. It was not a huge change, but it's the sort of thing that actually tightens it all up, and you just look at it after and go, yeah, that's better.
And I'm a big believer, kind of less is more.
Absolutely.
I had to kind of cut back till you can't really cut back anymore without losing, comprehension.
Yeah, sometimes, you can cut away too much, can't you? And you start thinking, doesn't quite make any sense now. But I've been listening to lots of audiobooks recently. I was listening to, just this afternoon, Louis L'Amour, old Western writer Louis L'Amour, who was David Gemmell's favourite writer. So David Gemmell basically mirrored him, but didn't write Westerns, he wrote fantasy.
Yeah.
And the style is very sort of reminiscent, very, very short, short pulp fiction type novels. But yeah, it's very pared back, and you get these things where I'm listening to it, and I'm realizing that, there's very few. It's a bit like Elmore Leonard. He does this sort of stripping everything back, and there's very few attributions. So there's very few he said, she said. It's just, a bit of description, and then bam, 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 dialogue, then on to the next bit. It's really good.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm old enough that I was reading David Gemmell as he wrote the books, one by one, and I'm reading David Gemmell to my youngest son, kind of his bedtime stories.
Yeah,
which is lovely. I was kind of really interested to go back and see him, because I think after Tolkien, and Robert E. Howard, David Gemmell was the biggest influence in me as a kind of a teen reader, and I just loved how there was such kind of wisdom in his writing. It was always kind of a great story, really interesting characters, but then it was always kind of deeper and more interesting. And he said kind of great life. There were kind of life lessons.
There was real belief
in his stories,
in this heroism of the characters, of that heroes really exist, and they need to exist, and you need to have these bigger than life characters. And I think that he took that from the Westerns, and he sort of said, the Westerns, and it's interesting. I read it just a thing, I think yesterday or the day before, very, very recently, that in an interview with David Gemmell, and he said that it was all about having this heroism, and that the Western, the original sort of archetypal Westerns, they were this, the knight errant that rides into town and is a hero, and he saves the day, and he shoots the bad guys and saves the girl or whatever. And he said, and then as time progressed, they got darker and darker, and they got the kind of the anti-hero, and the spaghetti westerns, in the 1960s and in the 70s, everything got a bit darker, and then you kind of lost that essence of real heroism, because it became maybe more nuanced and realistic, but you lost the heroism. And so he said, fantasy was really the only way to go, that you could just create your own heroes.
That's so really interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's like when you're writing something like Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer or Age of Sigmar, it's the fantasy side of things. They give you that ability, right, of just creating anything you want. So if you want to drive home a point in some way, or create a very heroic character or a very evil character, you have to worry about the constraints of realism and believability in the same way that you do if you're writing, Viking Fire. I mean,
you'll know, writing historical fiction, even if you bend fiction, or you bend the kind of the details, you have to be. The point of it, in many ways, is to be authentic to the details, and to know the details, and the readers expect you to get the details right. And so there's quite a lot of, I think, kind of Shield Wall. I mean, Shield Wall was the book that took me the longest, and it took me 5 years to write, which kind of is crazy looking back on it now. But I was so kind of obsessed with getting everything right that I was forever kind of writing a scene, then going on the internet and finding kind of archaeological PDFs about what you would use as kindling, and I remember finding one excavation of a fireplace in Dublin where they found that they were using rye straw as kindling, and they were using kind of bundles of wheat straw, I forget now. And that would have been obvious to people at the time. You clearly would use rye straw as kindling and not wheat straw as burning fuel.
That's
and so I was just kind of trying to get all these details right, and it just kind of, it was lovely to switch to fantasy and 40k, and just make up ridiculous stuff. And for those of you who don't know about Warhammer and the Warhammer 40,000, it was created originally in the 1980s. It was almost a parody of kind of Thatcherism and a kind of gothic vision of the future, which actually it's interesting now because it was quite unique, because most sci-fi was kind of shiny and bright and, you know, Star Trek.
Yeah.
And Warhammer's vision of the future was kind of grim, dark, and
It's the opposite of David
dreadful.
Gemmell.
Yeah, exactly. And in many ways, I think kind of a lot of kind of that fantasy or sci-fi writing has taken the grim, dark, you know, lead and kind of followed. And you know, we're now in the future, and you know, a lot of the stuff we imagined hasn't come true.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a moment just to look at some of the questions, because people have been posting things.
They have been.
Yeah, we've got lots of stuff in here. So so hello to everybody. I'm not going to go in every single person saying hello. So Tony says, oh, currently he's blitzing through the Benicio Chronicles and absolutely loving them. Thank you very much. Moira says, good evening to two of my favorite authors. Well, there you
Fantastic.
go. Can't get better than that. Thank you very much. Loving the new Bear Brand book. Very good. From Craig, thank you. Good evening, guys. Question for both. What advice would you give to a would-be author? This is from Michael Beaumont. Okay, so advice. One piece of advice for a would-be author.
I'm going to give two. One is a really good piece of advice, and that is to work out what your story is about. And what the story is about is different to what happens in the story. So, for example, I remember Captain Corelli's Mandolin. If you haven't read it, it's, you know, an Italian soldier, spoilers, you know, but Italian soldier goes to Greek island during the Second World War and falls in love, kind of a love story. Yeah, and there's this first 70 pages that no one understands because it's not at all like the love story. And I heard Louis de Bernier being interviewed way back, and someone's asked him, what's the story? And I thought, well, it's a love story. And he said, I wanted to write a story that shows what happened to ordinary people in time of war. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant, because that's completely not what I would have expected. And so if you're trying to write, to have a kind of a one sentence definition of what your story is about is really useful, because it keeps you on the straight and narrow, because stories, they'll just spawn more ideas, and they'll spawn more characters and storylines, and you'll just get lost in a kind of a delta of kind of storylines. So that's a really good piece of advice. And the other one is don't give up.
So your second piece of advice is basically the piece of advice I was going to give. Not exactly don't give up, but I was going to just say it's on that theme though, which is finish what you write. So finish what you start, basically. So we talked a lot before about writing when I was working full time, and you writing your first books, and it is about not giving up. But it's also, if you don't finish what you start, then you're never going to publish it or self-publish it. Nobody's going to read an unfinished book or an unfinished story. So even if you think it's shit, and believe me, Justin and me at many stages of the writing of our novels will think they're shit. And I haven't asked Justin, but I'm absolutely sure that he will agree that many stages of the process he'd be thinking, this book is rubbish. I wish I hadn't started this book. I wish I could just put it away and start another one. But you just have to keep going, and then when you finish it, then go back and read it and then make it better. And that's the difference between an amateur and a professional writer, is that the professionals finish.
And the third piece of advice is read Stephen King's On Writing, because there's so much great stuff in there.
That too. So he's the one who sort of writes 2,000 words a day. He just plugs away, and I think that's a really good piece of advice. I mean, today I sat down, and yesterday I was really tired and didn't manage to write much. And today I kind of threw away what I'd written, which I very rarely do. But today I just got back in the saddle and I wrote 2,000 words. And I'm sure that when I go back to it and read it, some bits will be okay. But as I was doing it, I was thinking, oh, this is really bad. But I always think everything I'm writing is bad when I'm writing it. So don't listen to the voices, people, not the voice in your head. Right, so next question. So Osama says, one question from me. What parts of the Benicio Chronicles did you have the hardest time writing? Jeepers, I don't know. Well, I've just said it's all hard, so it's all difficult to write. I don't know. So I don't know. Maybe in the first book. So things evolve. So each book, I find as a writer, obviously I grow and improve, hopefully improve anyway, but I definitely change and grow older and more experienced. And so each book is slightly different. And as I get more experience, I try to do with each book, do something different and try to make them different things. I'll try different points of view, or think just different techniques almost to make it interesting for me to do the writing, the writing as well. And in that first book, The Serpent's Sword, I think that's probably, obviously that's the one where I was learning the most. And I think probably the most difficult thing was I put quite a detailed sex scene in there. And that's because I kind of felt like, well, actually, I said this from the beta reader. So one of the beta readers read it and sort of went, "I'm waiting for the sex scenes. Where's the sex scene?" And it was the time when Game of Thrones was on TV and it was all the rage. And he was like, "I'm watching Game of Thrones all the time and Spartacus and all this stuff, and there's loads of shagging all the time. Where's the shagging? I want more." And there was romance in the book, so I just thought, "Oh yeah, maybe he's right. Maybe I need to put that in." And so, and that's probably a bit difficult. And in hindsight, I don't regret putting it in there, but I don't write as much sex in the later books because it doesn't feel necessary. But if it's necessary, I'll put it in. Yeah.
Do your parents alive? They read your
Yes, both my parents are alive, and they read. I don't know if they read all my books, but they definitely read that one. They definitely read the first.
Okay,
book.
yeah.
My dad actually helped me edit the first one. He's very.
I think there's another thing that you have to get over it when you're writing is my mother is going to read this complex.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
I was quite young when I wrote my first book, and I think my mum and all her friends read it and had quite a lot of fairly lurid sex scenes in it, and they were all quite appalled. And a lot of them have never read anything of my stuff since. So,
okay.
Yeah,
I have to read that. I haven't read that now.
You'll love it.
Oh, that sounds great. I could use. Well, I basically copied your shield wall. So now I need to copy the sex scenes from that. So.
Yeah.
I did. It's a true story that when we've talked about this in different events, that when you're reading someone's books, the style of the writer that you're reading tends to somehow go through your brain back onto the page that you're writing. So you're reading someone's style, and it becomes imbued into what you're writing. And I definitely found that I could almost tell where in The Serpent's Sword I started reading Shield Wall because the writing was better. I was suddenly thinking, wow, suddenly these descriptions are so much more vivid. It's so much better. I'm thinking, well, this is where I was reading Shield Wall, because you have a real. Especially in Shield Wall, because I've read Viking Fire as well, which is great. But I think you prefer Viking Fire from what you said. I think in some ways you prefer. But
I think Viking Fire is a better book.
I'm going to put my. My wife, whatever it is, to the mast.
My wife agrees with you, but I think Viking Fire is a better book, but there's kind of more heart or soul in Shield Wall.
Shield Wall's got some strange structural bits where it kind of jumps around a bit, and that didn't 100% work in my opinion. But the actual writing, because you start like some month, you sort of did some sort of flashback thing at the beginning. I can't remember now. It starts
someone's
10, dying,
15, and then Wolfnoth is dying, and then it goes back to
And I don't think that, for me, when I was reading, I thought, I don't know, that I could almost think that was an editorial decision. An editor said you should do this, and it felt like it didn't quite work.
I just like that beginning so much.
I like the beginning. I thought it was really well written. I think everything about it. I love the writing, but I think that structural decision, I was like, that's a bit, but love the writing. Brilliant. So I say Tony asks, I think, did I skip someone's question? No, Tony asks, do you develop and plan full biographies for the major characters within your work before starting, or do they adapt as you progress?
What do you do?
So I do as little work as possible, but actually for this latest book, the book I'm writing now, I actually tried to do a bit more. I don't do full biographies though, but I've tried to do a little bit more. It depends on the novel. It depends on the book. And sometimes, very often, characters, well, even now, so I've created the characters that I thought they're going to be in this new book. And I'm writing the Benicio Chronicles #9 now. And there's a lot of new characters because they're in a new place. And so it's actually quite challenging for me because I'm not in the same land. So new history, new kings, new places, new characters. So I'm actually really struggling. I'm only about 5, 6, no, about 10,000 words in now, I think. But just today, I broke down these characters and I thought these are going to be the main characters. I know who they are. And then as soon as I get into a chapter and I'm writing suddenly just a new character. So I've got 2 characters have appeared in the last 2 chapters, and I've just got placeholders at the moment. One just says warrior and the other one says lord, and they just appear, and then I don't even know what they're called. Sometimes when I give them a name, they sort of take on more of a character. Sometimes I write, if they're sort of a character that just appears in one chapter, I sometimes just write them as I see them sort of in that moment of the chapter, never really go back to them, and then at the very end just give them a name. If they're a recurring character that appears, I will give them a name sooner, so it sort of sometimes sort of creates a bit more of a visual, and then I'll kind of create a bit more of a visual idea for them. But often the description is, I don't know, fat lord with big beard,
bearded warrior.
And that becomes, that's who they are. And then sometimes I'll pick out a certain trait for them. Maybe they're very sarcastic or they're loud or whatever. There's some sort of thing, and that just becomes that character. But not a huge detailed biography. What about you?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of lazy in many ways, and I'm always kind of desperate to start writing. So I don't like to kind of do much work planning, which is part of the thing about doing the apprenticeship with that library, of kind of forcing myself to do a bit more planning. And with my first novel, The Drinking Room Tea House, I knew each character was most afraid of. And that was actually really interesting, because that kind of piece of information gave me, I could tell what they were going to do in any situation almost. And I found the novel I'm working on now, which is a Black Library novel, I gave each character a flaw, or something they regretted. And again, I found that has worked really well. So, that's a kind of takeaway for me, that, give each character a flaw, or just kind of, work it out. And that really helps. It helps me in my writing of kind of define how they react with other people and other characters in the story.
It's really interesting talking about the characters and how they sort of drive things, and about the history and everything. Because this new book, I've got historical characters that are in, and because it's some new historical characters that I've just read about for the first time, and because it's 7th century, there's so the stuff that's written about them is so nebulous, and it's so you really don't know how true it is. And so, but bits just jump out, and I think, okay, I know this probably isn't true. I can put it in the historical note. I'll write, this is mentioned by some hagiographer or whatever, that is probably rubbish, but they just sound so good. Some of the events that happened, or some of the way they behave or whatever. So they're just thrown in. Actually, in the Night of Flames, which I've just handed in, it's going to print. There's a character in there, and he's a historical character, and it's actually the wrong period. So this is set in the late 8th century, so the very beginning of the Viking Age, that book, and I think this character actually is from like the 7th century or something. But I saw his name on a list of kings of the petty kingdoms of Norway, and he's called Horleif. I can't pronounce his name. It's something like Hjorleif Hjorson the Fornicator. So as soon as I had this name, Hjorleif Hjorson the Fornicator, I thought, come on, you've got to have a king in there called the Fornicator. So I got this horrendous character. He's like something out of the Black Library. He's incredibly overweight, basically just everything. He just is hedonistic to the extreme. Just basically shagging everybody, eating everything he can, drinking everything. Just awful, but great fun to write.
Absolutely.
More questions here. Question for me from Craig: will there be a book to follow on from Wolf of Wessex, or a prequel? Never say never, but I'm not planning one at the moment. I did have an idea for a sequel, very nebulous. When I say an idea, for me, an idea is like, maybe they could go to Winchester. That's my idea. I don't have any more detail than that, but I did have like an idea. But then I got sort of sidetracked, and then I've got 2 series on the go. There's no way I can start trying to keep track of a 3rd series, so not at the moment. But it's possible that if you start looking at the timelines, it's possible that Hunlaf in A Time for Swords, if that series goes on long enough, could end up crossing over with Dunstan from Wolf of Wessex. So you could have like a prequel situation where Dunstan appears in a later book, possibly. And I don't think anyone's picked up all of the links that I've got in my other series to the Benicio Chronicles as well. But if you look close enough, you'll find there are links, some very more obvious than others, to the Benicio Chronicles. So just thinking there, I'm not going to tell you what they are. So Tony also says, I think technical writing is a different discipline to fiction. You should have seen some of the manuals I was writing. Yeah, often we had to write on spec, so often we'd have to write descriptions of really complicated configurations of software when the software hadn't been completed. So it was a bit like fiction sometimes. Yeah. Wolf of Wessex was fantastic. I used to sneakily read it at work on my phone. I was that desperate to know what happened in the story. That's what you want to hear. And Chris Bailey from the from the Bernard Cornwell. Obviously, I stole the initials, the BC, from the Bernard Cornwell fan club, says that it was the cover that meant that the book did so well, because he actually produced the axe.
Confidence.
Well, you can produce the axe, which you can see in the background here. So that is the axe. Somebody actually asked, do you own that axe? Well, I own the axe, as you can see, because it's right back there. So I sort of designed it, and Chris did all the work on it, and it was incredible.
Fantastic.
Generous. A lot of effort went into that, and it's on the cover. My daughter took the photo, and then Head of Zeus put it all together with their designers. And so if anyone wants to read, if you haven't seen it, on my blog, there's a post all about the creation of that axe with photos and stuff. Another question for us both from Osama. What kind of research do you do? How long do you spend researching before beginning a book? Okay, we sort of touched on that a little bit in the previous thing. So what about you, Justin?
Yeah, Shield was my first expedition into kind of the 11th century. I did a crazy amount of research. I did Old English at university, so I retaught myself Old English. I translated poems from Old English into English, and then I was looking for a way to describe the world, and I wanted to find ways that they describe their own world to use in my own writing. And anyone who knows any Old English poetry, it's all set in midwinter. It's bleak, it's miserable, everyone's dying, and I can't have the whole whole of Shield Wall set in midwinter. And so I was really stuck for a while, and then I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and I was walking through a library at Lingnan University, which is kind of like Hong Kong's kind of fourth university. And I was walking through the English section just out of curiosity, and I saw a book on a shelf. It just kind of caught my eye, and it was a hardback, and it just said the lost literature of England and of medieval England. And I thought that's kind of interesting. And the last time it had been taken out was 1959, and it was a list of all the books that we know existed, but have been lost. So we know they existed because they're in monastery catalogues.
Oh, wow, that sounds
survived.
great.
Yeah, it was a brilliant book.
I need that for my Hunlaf series, because it's all about books.
So
Name of the Roses.
So as a contrast, kind of all the Latin literature about or by the Anglo-Saxons tends to be hagiography, which are full of say St. Cuthbert goes to Lindisfarne and turns it into kind of bountiful
talks to the seals
everything.
Stuff,
so all the kind of the opposite of the kind of the bleak Anglo-Saxon Old English literature was the Latin literature, which was full of kind of saints doing miraculous things. So that was really useful. There are so many different kinds of research. I mean, there's kind of the historical research, kind of what happened when, who was where, and who killed who. Then there's the much more kind of deeper, more challenging research, which I like to go to the literature. And if I can't find it in kind of Anglo-Saxon stuff, I read a lot of Chinese poetry. And the Tang Dynasty, which is kind of year 600 to 900, is brilliant. And you're getting kind of, I mean, it's Chinese details, but there's a lot of stuff from a kind of a pre-modern age, which is really good detail. And I find that it's the details that make it interesting and surprising. So that's kind of a bizarre answer, but
yeah. Well, the short answer to the thing is I'll try to do as little research as possible, which is it sounds a bit like Justin really. I want to get writing. I feel like I'm not working if I'm not actually writing words on the page. So yeah, so I'll try and get to the writing quickly, but I'll probably with these latest novels I'll probably spend about a month reading and researching and plotting beforehand. A lot of reading up on sort of watching YouTube videos and all sorts of things. And talking of sort of interesting research material, when I did Wolf of Wessex, because lots of that is about the main character Dunstan traipsing around through this forest in the 9th century. And it's all about survival skills. And so I bought all the books by Ray Mears, watched all Ray Mears videos and stuff. And lots of the stuff that he does is go to indigenous peoples in different parts of the world and find out how they make fire or drill sap out of a birch or whatever it is. And and so I incorporated lots of that information in there because I thought, well, if the native Sami people of Finland or whatever, or Lapland or wherever they are doing something with a tree, then why couldn't they have done it if they've got the same tree in Britain in the 9th century? So that sort of stuff. And I think it adds an authenticity because it is real. Somebody somewhere is doing it, like you said about the Chinese stuff. So if somebody was doing it like that, nobody can turn around and say, well, this is wrong. They didn't really cook in that way, or they didn't prepare a fire in that way, because it has an authentic ring to it.
It was interesting doing Viking Fire, actually, because I'd never been to Norway, and I wanted to describe Norway in a way that wasn't a kind of an outsider looking in, but someone who grew up there, describing it. And it was a real kind of range of stuff. And there's obviously stuff in the sagas, which are a brilliant resource. And I read the Norwegian Wood, the Lars, I forget his name now, but it was a hit a couple of years ago about kind of chopping wood and stacking wood. And it was just a book completely about, chopping wood basically for winter. And then there was a Norwegian artist from the 19th, 20th century, early 20th century, who kind of painted pictures of all the kind of wildflowers coming down in the summer. So you're looking for, I think you're kind of looking for a range of really odd things that gives you a kind of authentic take on the world. So even if it's not real, it could be real.
Yes, and that's really interesting. I always say authenticity is more important than accuracy for historical fiction. It needs to feel lived in and real and like believable. And funnily enough, I mean, A Night of Flames, they go to Norway, as I mentioned before. Half the book is set in Norway, and I've never been to Norway either. And it's tough during lockdown, so you can't travel to write a book about somewhere that you've never been. But thank God we've got the internet, and so lots of Googling, YouTube videos of people sailing around, going up, whatever I could find, and walking tours of Norway and
it was funny actually thinking about with Viking Fire. I was almost in my last draft, and I happened to go off to a Greek island to do a teaching course for a couple of weeks, and I think I was so kind of blown away by the Greek islands. It's been a long time since I was in Greece, and I thought, oh God, I haven't done justice to the Mediterranean part of Harald Hardrada's story. I have to kind of rework that.
Well, it felt like that period. Yeah, it's sort of glossed over a bit, isn't it, in the book? I remember there's some stuff there, but it's not as detailed.
Yeah.
Well, there's not as much of it. I think it's detailed, but there's fewer chapters, aren't there? And I can't remember now the structure, but I remember feeling that there was a lot more to his life that you could have written about. But obviously, there's a.
Well, I think the descriptions of the place and the heat certainly benefited from just having been there on holiday. So holidays of research.
I would love to. I want to go to Norway. Yeah, I need to go. My next, I won't say where the next one's going to be, but I keep trying to set them in places I can then go on holiday, but we never seem to coincide. So a question from Matt Dean says, how do you make the decision about whether a book will be written in third or first person?
Have you written first person?
So I can tell you now, I have written in first person. So the Hunlaf books are in first person, and the decision was made. I said earlier that with each novel, I try to do something different. And so the decision was made. All my previous books have been third person and multi points of view. So in the Bearbrand books, there's always multiple points of view, although I'm not very strict about it. So that those points of view can change, in each book. And in Wolf of Wessex, I just recently read Toby Clements's Kingmaker series.
Okay, yeah.
just before that, and they're fantastic. If anybody's not read those, you should read them. So I really thought they were great novels. I mean, very rarely read a whole series, and I listened to the audiobooks. I listened to all four, and I loved them. And they were written two main characters, a female and a male character, together, single timeline pretty much all the time, but it's jumping from one to the other. So one chapter's the man, one chapter's the woman, it alternates. And I thought, as a challenge to myself, I'm going to do the same thing with Wolf of Wessex. So I had the old man and the young girl, and basically alternate all throughout. So at one point, my editor said, you need to add another chapter. And I thought, no, I don't. I need to add 2 chapters because I need to have one. I need to continue this thing. So that's how I decided that. And when I then started writing the Hunlaf books, A Time for Swords, I literally, it was just a matter of me thinking, what's the next challenge that I need to set myself? I'll write this one in first person. And I can tell you.
And how different did you find it?
I can tell you it's the most difficult thing that I've done so far, writing in first person.
Okay. And why was it difficult?
Experience. It's difficult. Have you written in first person at all?
Yeah. Well, so my first books were, obviously first person because they were travel books.
Well, okay,
but I've written first person novels, yeah.
Because I found it most difficult because I find there's a couple of reasons. I think one, because the timeline, you're only from the eyes of that person, so you can't do any shenanigans of like explaining what's happening off camera. So that's difficult.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, it's kind of difficult to be in someone's head all the time, in the single person's head. So I find, I don't know, it's just more. There's no moment of escape. Sometimes you just want to go, right, I want to write from someone else's perspective because I'm kind of fed up with being in this person or writing this person's point of view. And also I think because I can't do that, jumping out to someone else's point of view, you don't have that ability to look in at them and kind of pass judgment on them. So I can, if Bearbrand is acting like an asshole, I can have another character thinking Bearbrand's an asshole. But when you're the arsehole, when you're writing, you're writing the story from the perspective of the single person, you can never do that. So I found that difficult. So those are sort of the things I struggle with.
Yeah, because one of the kind of things that make a book easier is having different storylines that you can switch between. So each storyline, in a sense, carries less of the reader's, less of the kind of the story's burden, and you can spread it out a bit more, and you can switch between them like soap operas do. You're cutting between kind of moments, so you don't have that. And you're kind of always in the present. Everything is seen through the character who's telling the story. But I found, so I did it with a 40k novel. I think the first one I did was a book called Terminal Overkill, which is written by a young female character, and I found it really fun.
I can see in 40k it could be fun because you can just basically let yourself go a bit crazy.
Yeah, and you can make a ton of shit up.
Yeah, so you can just make stuff up to fill in anything. Yeah, I mean, saying that, I think it might be more difficult to write, but I think the outcome may be more immediate and better. I mean, my children, my eldest daughter's 22 now, but when she was younger, I remember she would only read first person novels because she said they're easier to read. So maybe it's easier for certain readers.
It's very fashionable. It has been fashionable for quite a while. I think I prefer kind of non-first person novels, in a sense, just because first person, so many people write in first person, and it is very fashionable. And I'm a contrarian, and I tend to do things, that people.
I've just started this new Bearbrand book, and it's third person again, and I'm struggling to work out which point of view to use with each chapter. I'm thinking, do I just stick with Bearbrand? This is why I threw stuff away today, actually, because I'd started writing from a perspective of one of the characters, and I thought I don't need to do that. Well, I'm just going to stick with Bearbrand at this point. But at one point I started writing in first person. I read back what I'd written, and I'd actually written it in first person because obviously I was still in the so I saw the horses, ride over the hill or whatever, and I suddenly thought, well, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
What? So weird.
Yeah. I guess I find it kind of writing most exciting when it is third person, and you are leaving gaps for the reader to understand what's happening, and letting them tell the story.
More questions.
Yeah.
What do you find to be the most frustrating part of being an author? And that's a question from John McAfee.
You're writing a brilliant book that's not a bestseller. That's my personal gripe.
Is that your personal gripe then? Okay, so I think my most frustrating thing. So I used to be. So I've always been creative, and everything that I've done before has been much more immediate. So I gravitated towards performance. So I wanted to be an actor, and then I was a singer in bands, and I think so. This constant craving for approbation and applause, and probably a deep-seated sort of flaw in my character. But I think there's two sides to that. There's obviously I've got a creative side, but obviously I've got this sort of performance. I want the feedback more quickly, and I think I love the immediacy of the fact you finish a song and then you get the applause, and then everyone goes, "Well, that was great," and you go, "Brilliant," or you was shit, but you know straight away. With the writing, the fact that you spend X number of months or even a year or two or whatever writing, and then you send it out to the world, then it goes for months and months and months and months, and then it gets published, and then people go, "Oh, that was a bit shit," or "that was great," but it's so long after the event that it's kind of you by the point that people are writing reviews about it and saying it was great, or they liked it, or they didn't like, you've almost forgotten about it. I've almost forgotten about the book by that point.
Well, you've probably written another one by then.
Well, that's right, yeah, and I find it frustrating.
And that's in your head.
Yeah, and I find it frustrating getting asked questions. They have to do, people say like, what's going on? Why did you write this? I'm thinking, well, I don't even remember that character because I'm writing the next one.
What happened?
I don't remember, which is strange. So that's frustrating. I think there's lots of frustrating things, but it's a great job. I mean, it's fantastic.
Oh, we're so lucky.
Yeah. The frustrations are like first world problems. It's sort of frustrations of things like getting interrupted when you want to focus and you've got an idea and you can't because life catches up on you. But that's life, really.
Yeah.
So Tony Jewell says, I do a lot of figure painting and listen to audiobooks whilst doing so. Currently listening to the Rome series by Simon Scarrow, and they're great listening. Do you imagine your books being read aloud? To me, they are two differing storytelling processes. So I can answer very quickly, is I do imagine them being read aloud. I hear the words and I love the audiobooks, and I actually listen to the audiobooks of the previous book when I'm writing the next one in the series to try to remember what the hell happens.
Wow.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Because as I said, I've forgotten. So I've written, I did the Bearbrand book a year ago, book 8 for Lord and Land, which just came out. Since then, now I've written A Night of Flame. So it's 160,000 words of another thing. And now I'm writing book 9 of Benicio Chronicles. I'm thinking, what the hell? And in fact, I'm plotting. I've got this whole plot line. I'm thinking, right, Bearbrand, this guy doesn't know Bearbrand. And today I suddenly went, he does know him, because in book 6, he met. So one of the ways, yeah. So one of the ways, yeah. So one of the ways of sort of catching up with some of the sort of the tone of it and some of the characterizations and who's, what they're like, is just to listen to the audiobook, and so we're getting a bit of a feel. So what about you?
You listen as you're actually writing, or you're listening?
No. I listen if I'm walking the dog or something, or in the car. I'll listen. I maybe not listen to the whole novel, but I might listen to certain chapters. Go back, and it just gives me an idea. Like I did just the other day, I listened to the end, like the last 2 chapters, sort of how it's set up, because it's sort of set up on almost on a cliffhanger. So I thought, how does it end? And I learned stuff from listening to it again. So the characters have been introduced. And I suddenly think, oh, right, so that's how I introduced them. I'd sort of forgotten. I knew they were there, but I'd forgotten how I'd set them up. So.
Yeah. So I don't think I do necessarily think about them being audiobooks, but I do think about them how they sound, especially the ones I'm doing, Shield Wall and Viking Fire, because Shield Wall, I really wanted to kind of capture Old English and Old English poetry. And so it's even kind of almost written in Old English kind of verse with alliteration.
Yeah.
And
I love
I think,
that.
I think if you read it aloud, it just kind of falls into the same rhythm as Beowulf. It has a kind of cadence to it.
So I remember when I was writing the first few books in the Benicio Chronicles, I made a much more of an effort to actually do the same as you. I think I was kind of thinking around those lines already of like trying to use stuff that had all had its root in the Anglo-Saxon period rather than Latin or Greek or more modern, usage.
Yeah.
And so I was very much geared up to sort of writing that way, thinking about the alliteration, and obviously all the titles of my books have got the alliteration of that series for that reason, sort of to feel like the poetry of the time. And am I right in saying that you helped to crowdfund The Wake by Paul
I did, yeah.
Kingsnorth? Because I saw your name in the back and I just thought it could be another Justin Hill, but my name's in the back as well. So how funny is that? I like the fact that I think I'd only just been published, I think, the first book, and then I opened that up and said, look, me and Justin both published. I'm in the same book as Justin Hill. And I really liked that. So what did you think of it? So I actually enjoyed that because I'd been reading so much Old English and I was so sort of attuned to the sound of the language, I guess. If anyone hasn't read it, Paul Kingsnorth's book is well, he calls it like a shadow tongue or something, which basically it's like a mishmash of Old English with modern language, and it sort of tries to emulate Old English without being Old English. But I found it very easy to read, although I thought the actual story itself was lacking in structure or really anything. But I thought the actual process of the reading I thought was interesting, if that makes sense.
You did better than me. I couldn't stand it.
Okay.
Well, I guess because I knew Old English and I
think that's probably why I don't know Old English.
Yeah, it didn't do anything for me at all. And I literally held it up as an example because the book arrived and I was doing a talk to some master's creative writing, massive fine arts students in Hong Kong, and I held it up and said, this is why some books,
kind of thing.
Yeah, this is why some books are kickstarted rather than published by mainstream publishers.
But it was nominated for the Booker Prize, wasn't it, or something?
And literally the next day, it got longlisted for the Booker Prize.
Yeah. I mean, that was crazy. I did think that was crazy. Really.
I think it was tokenism. Yeah. I think they wanted to, they had a few spaces. Having been quite closely involved in a lot of prizes in Hong Kong, they had a few spaces left over, and they wanted to make a statement about self-published or crowd-funded books.
Yeah.
Or he knew people.
Anyway, I mean, it was interesting. Anyway, our name's in the back.
Yeah.
So so we got we've been chatting for like an hour and a half, but there's a few questions left. If you're okay with you up for going through a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Craig is asking, Matthew, what's the other series you're writing apart from the Bear Brand books, please? The first book is called A Time for Swords, and the series is originally called A Time for Swords because we couldn't think of a better title for the series, so that is the title. So yeah, A Time for Swords, the first one's out, and the second one is coming out in March, and that's A Night of Flames. And the third one, I have no idea what it will be called. It will be a something of something, I'm guessing. To both, if you were giving a one-way ticket to any era in history and had no choice but to go, which era would you go to?
Yeah, I think before 1066, I went to Anglo-Saxon England.
You'd go if you had to go back and live there.
Yeah, I would. So we know from their skeletons that they actually were healthier.
Yes,
they were taller, or taller actually than contemporary Britons now.
Yeah,
and so they were clearly living. If you survived, you were living quite a healthy life.
Yeah, I think it would be quite. Yeah, you have to try to find the bit of time around maybe like sort of early 11th century or something when it was maybe a bit peaceful. Because there's
I think from 1016 onwards, you want
50-year period of
avoid Ethered and Ready, because clearly that would be a disaster. That's probably the worst time to be English. So yeah, I think from 1016 onwards, and then I would die in 1065, and that'd probably be a pretty good life. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know about me. I mean, basically, we'd love to stay anywhere where they've got antibiotics and modern medicine, really. But if that's not the case, then I could say the 7th century, but I think I'd get my head kicked in and killed pretty quickly, or just die of a horribly boring life, and then I don't know. maybe something, maybe the period. I mean, something really ridiculous. Like I could go back to the 19th century, but in the time, like if I could choose who to go with, where to be in that period, then maybe 19th century as part of Sir Richard Francis Burton's expedition to discover the source of the Nile, something like incredibly adventurous and at least amazing. That even if I died on the way, it would be exciting.
You'd be in a book somewhere
while it lasted. Yeah. That would be amazing. I would love to. Yeah, I'd love to have met him. I'm born on the same day as him. That's my claim to fame.
Okay.
And I speak 2 languages as opposed to 39 or whatever he spoke.
Yeah.
Do you always start writing a book at the beginning, or have an idea and move both ways, like starting in the middle first? Julie Howard says.
Yeah, I'm a beginning person.
Me too.
I like to kind of get the foundations. And once that's good, I kind of build the next scene, and it's kind of foundations, and you build on top of that.
I always start from the beginning, and I find the beginning quite difficult. I'm struggling at the moment. I've been working on it for like a week, this new book on the actual writing, and I can really tell that it's difficult. I'm basically putting bricks in and pulling bricks out, and bits are falling down, and I'm going, oh well, and I'm kind of thinking all the time, where's this got to go? And I think later on, I go back and rewrite the first 2 or 3 chapters a lot more than maybe other bits, because I suddenly realize I have to sow the seeds of certain things. And
it's not until you get to the end of the book that you realize actually where the beginning should be.
Exactly.
So you can't spend too long on that. You've got to kind of keep moving.
Yeah. They always say, I mean, I think it was Elmore Leonard said, start as close to the end as you can. Something like that. Yeah. It's easier said than done.
It's true.
So Chris Bailey said something very nice about Kin of Cain, which is my novella, short story. It's my sort of tribute to Beowulf, unputdownable apparently. So that's very nice. Thank you very much, Chris.
Fantastic.
It's actually one of my favorite books. It's only a novella, and it's probably at the time I thought I can write loads of novellas. This would be brilliant, because I wrote the whole thing in about 6 weeks or something.
And how long was it?
About 24,000 words, something like that.
Okay,
25,000. And I thought, this is brilliant. Write this in a month or 5 weeks or whatever it was. And one strand of story, really liked it. Great. Sold terribly. I don't know if it's just because it's a novella, or because it doesn't sit within a series as easily. It's not found as part of the series, or what. It's not sold anything in comparison to the novels, which is very disappointing, because I would love to write more novellas. But anyway. Okay, Tony Jules saying nice things about the Benicio Chronicles and wants to go and listen to them on audio, which is good. But I've got this strange situation that all of my books have been narrated by the same narrator.
And did you pick them?
I didn't pick him originally. He was picked by the publishers, or by whoever was doing the deal, because it's this strange arcane world with publishing, which you probably know that people listening maybe aren't aware of, but things happen, and you're then made aware of them afterwards. So they say things like, oh yes, we're definitely going to get the audiobook done for this, and then like 3 months later, I'm like, well, what's happening about the audiobook? Is it happening then? And then they go, yeah, it's definitely happening. And it's like, what? When is it happening? And then it sort of goes quiet again, and like months later they go, oh yeah, the audiobook's happening, and I don't know, there's all stuff going on in the background. And they said, this is the guy, Barnaby Edwards, he's doing the audiobook, and he did the first 3 books all at once. Boom, they all came out. And since then, he's done all of them. And
is he good?
Thank goodness. So since then, I've chosen him, and I've met him via Zoom. We've chatted and everything. So he's a really, really nice guy. And he does a great job, and very happy. But it's an interesting thing, because I think most people don't have that situation where they've got the same. Because even over both series, he's done all of the books.
Yeah, I remember Viking Fire. They suggested a really terrible. He had a really kind of slightly camp voice, a kind of a young guy who was starting off, and I think he was just cheap for Harold Tardrada. And I was like, no, you can't do that. It's got he's got a northern accent at least. So had some input at least. I was actually. I quite enjoyed it. I tend to kind of, whenever I have so Black Library, I get to pick quite a few and I tend to suggest Northern accents. Just makes me happier.
Well, he's got Barnaby's got received pronunciation, but he does all the accents. So he does he uses the accents for everyone. So, and we have a lot of discussion about it. He asked, what accent do you want people to have? And we had the whole conversation for Hunlaf, because it's all in first person, and he's writing it as an old man. He said, "Do you want me to read the whole thing like an old man?" And I was like, "Oh, that's going to be a bit weird, a bit grating."
Yeah.
So in the end, he did some mock-ups, sent stuff and said, this is me reading it like this is me reading it like that. What do you prefer? So let's go with that one.
And fantastic.
He's really good, very talented, and I mean, he records so many books, but he does lots of Doctor Who stuff as well, and he directs Doctor Who audio books and audio dramas, and he's appeared in the Doctor Who series. I think he's inside the Dalek many times. I think he's a Dalek. Matthew, what is it about the Anglo-Saxons that keeps you coming back? And would you ever consider writing in another time period? Keep coming back now because I've already done lots of the research, so it's easier, and I've got the series running. So that's the honest answer. Moving to Wolf of Wessex and A Time for Swords was a cry for help. No, it was an attempt to move slightly out of that early Anglo-Saxon period. And I thought it would be easy because I was only shifting a couple of 100 years, but actually it was almost as difficult as moving to a completely different time frame. So, and I would like to write something set in a later time period. 19th century is what I would like to write.
Westerns?
I'd like to write a novel, a Western, yeah. I'd like to write a Western. That's why I'm listening to all the Louis L'Amour stuff at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm building up to it. So hopefully next year I might write a Western, or at least start writing a Western. And then
how exciting.
I wrote the first line.
Folks?
I wrote the first line of the Western the other day.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what it was because it will be different.
We'll go marks up 10.
Yeah. But yeah, so I opened a file and I've got a line in there. Okay, so any more questions? I think we're done. We've been speaking for an hour and 36 minutes. Did you have any pressing questions that you wanted to ask me or say anything else before we finish?
No, I think that's good. It's been a pleasure.
Well, of course,
we've done very well, I think.
I think we've been nattering for a long time, so I've really enjoyed it. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time, Justin.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for everyone for coming along, and thanks for all the great questions as well. So it's been brilliant. I was going to say before you go, would you like just to plug your current books and what you're
so
at the moment?
I have a lot of Black Library stuff coming out. So I have my first horror novel is coming out from Black Library. It's called The Bookkeeper's Skull.
Oh, nice.
And it's coming out this autumn, I think. So that'll be in time for Halloween. And then
I hate doing taxes, so I'd quite like to do something to my bookkeeper's skull. That would be quite.
Taxes. Oh.
Yeah, anyway.
And then I have a book coming out kind of at least one a year with Black Library, and I'm starting the next Justin Hill novel end of this month.
Give us the scoop of that
exciting.
One. What's that? Give us something about it.
It's contemporary.
No,
it's contemporary. Yeah, so it's my first contemporary novel since my first. So I'm banishing demons here, and plunging back into
So if this is a massive success, you'll never be writing historical ever again.
No, I will. I will be writing Hastings after that.
Even if the contemporary one is like a massive worldwide bestseller, and you think, okay, two contemporary novels, they've both been huge. I think
I'm very contrary. I will definitely write Hastings. Yeah,
you'll be writing in Old English. Well, thank you, everyone. Everyone is saying thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you, guys,
watching. And this will still be available to watch. So if you want to go back and watch it again, it will be on Facebook, and I'll be posting it to YouTube sometime in the next couple of days. So thanks again. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Matthew.
Good luck with your writing. Good luck with everything.
Cheers.
Good luck, everyone, and stay safe. And goodbye.
Cheers.